Yep. Councilman Doug Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Gary Groninger.
Here.
Councilwoman Kathy Groninger. Councilwoman Lori Hammond.
Present.
Councilman Greg Hicksonball.
Here.
Mayor Phil Jenkins.
Here.
District Deputy Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Mayor James Mueller. Mayor Rod Robertson.
Here.
Councilman Mark Root.
Here.
Mayor Mark Center.
Here.
Mayor Jeremy Stutzman. Mayor Joseph Tallmer. Commissioners Susie Wyrick. Mayor Dave Wood.
Here.
We have a quorum of members present. I know a few members couldn't be here today from our councils and commissioners because AIC has a legislative conference. So that's why we are missing a few people, but we do quorum of members present.
Did you ask me? So Dr. Fleming's here?
Dr.
Commissioner Fleming?
Yep, we have you marked.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm on my phone.
All right. Thank you. I do want to welcome.
Bohannon's now on the screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have Councilperson Bohannon now. I do want to welcome two of our new members. That this, I believe, is their first official MACOG meeting. So Councilman Bohannon is joining us from the AIC Legislative Conference, and then Commissioner Mike Burrows is here in person. They are both our new Marshall County representatives. So I did want to welcome them since this is their first in-person meeting.
Welcome.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Minutes for the January 11th meeting.
I'll move for approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Finance report. Deb?
Good morning, everybody. You should all have the December 2022 financial report. Our year-to-date expenses through the end of December was $3,766,724.92. Our cash balance at December was $2,979,568.56. And our total expenditures for the month of December was $606,702.64. Are there any questions? If not, I'd like to ask for board approval of the December 2022 financial report.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Jenkins, anything?
I think you have your modification. Any questions, you can ask the staff.
Full business?
There's no old business today.
How about new business?
There is new business, and Allison will be presenting our changes to the Transportation Improvement Program.
Good morning, everyone. So for our new faces, my name is Allison Reagan. I'm our senior transportation planner, so primarily manage our transportation improvement program for our TEP. So James, if you're controlling these slides right now, really go ahead and perfect. So our amendments to our 22 to 26 TEP, our first set fall under Transportation Resolution 6-23. So within this resolution, there are 3 items. These are all locally initiated items sponsored by the city of Goshen. So essentially what we're doing with these 3 items is switching around the project development timelines for 2 projects. So the first project is at East College Avenue. This is phase 3 of this corridor. This phase runs from Century Drive to what we're calling the entrance of the planned development. So it's going to connect to the development of the north of College Avenue. And this is a 2-way left turn lane project. And then the other project in question, if you want to advance the slide, is Blackport Drive. So this runs from Monroe Street to Lincoln Avenue. So essentially with some changes and priorities, as well as some influences from projects in surrounding areas, primarily US 33, the city has decided to accelerate the timeline of the East College Avenue project and then push back the timeline of the Blackport Drive project. So with this, we kind of have to do some shuffling of the phases in our TIP. So for item A, item A is related to East College Avenue, and we're going to be adding right-of-way into the TIP. So it's previously programmed in fiscal year 2027, but we're going to be pulling it forward to 2025. So our TIP covers through 26, so we'll be pulling that forward into the TIP. And then item B is related to Blackport Drive. We'll be taking right-of-way and deleting it from the TIP with the intention of moving it to fiscal year 2027, which is outside of our current TIP. And then item C is again for Blackport Drive. For construction, we'll be deleting this phase from our current TIP with the intention of moving it to fiscal year 29. So taking a step back for East College Avenue, we'll have preliminary engineering in fiscal year 2023. We'll have right-of-way in 2025, and then construction is programmed for 2027, so not in our TIP right now. And then for Blackport Drive, we have preliminary engineering in 2023, right-of-way in 2027, and then construction in 2029. So happy to take any questions on these three items. Otherwise, I'd be asking for your approval of Transportation Resolution 6-23.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
And then we will go ahead and move on to Transit Resolution 7-23. So item A is related to our interurban trolley in Elkhart County. So with our transit project, it's a common practice to program placeholders into our TIP. And then once it's time to actually apply for the grant and spend down funding, we'll go back in and update numbers with actual numbers or with complete placeholders that aren't being utilized. So for item A, we're going to be deleting the operating assistance placeholder. This was programmed in a separate line item, so we just simply no longer need this placeholder in our TIP. And then moving on to the next slide, we have items B, C, and D. So the sponsor for these projects is NICD, so the Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District. So they operate the South Shore line that runs into Chicago. And so these items here are related to a project that will essentially relocate the station that's located currently at the South Bend Airport. So it's currently located on the west side of the airport, or sorry, currently located on the east side, and then we'll be moving it to the west side. And then this project also entails some upgrades to the rail leading up to the airport, so some possible rerouting. So I think right now, I'm excited that it currently takes trains 10 minutes to complete the last 2 miles leading up to the airport station. So they're hoping that some of this reconfiguration will reduce that time. They're also, as part of the bigger project, they're doing some upgrades in between Gary and Michigan City. So upgrading from a single track to a double track. So they're hoping that these improvements, as well as the improvements between Gary and Michigan City, will essentially reduce travel time from South Bend to Chicago from what is currently 2 hours to about 90 minutes. And I will say with this project, there's also a community safety benefit in that kind of reconfiguring the route to the airport location will help kind of address some accident complications that are happening currently around there. So for these items, for item B, we'll be adding in preliminary engineering into our TIP. So this will cover the engineering and environmental work associated with relocating the station. I believe they've hired DLV to complete this work. And then item C will be programming construction in fiscal year 23 in our TIP. And this will be for the purchase of track components for work leading up to the station. And then item D will be programming construction in 2024. And this will actually be for the financing of the relocation of the station. And just kind of one note, we don't really present on a lot of NICD projects, and that's primarily because NERC, which is our planning partner to the west, houses all of their project, all of the NICSI projects in their TIF. But anytime there's anything that is in our jurisdiction and is regionally significant, they send it over to us to add into our TIF for informational purposes. So happy to take any questions on any of these items.
Will the track continue to run along Bennett?
Run along what?
Bendix. So now, for those not familiar, it makes twice. And Bendix carries a lot of traffic from its existing line into the airport. And that means that it crosses Bendix twice. And Bendix carries a lot of traffic. It's also where South Bend School Corp has their bus depot. And so it would be our understanding that the design of this is still just getting started, very preliminary. But the idea is that it would come in hypothetically to that west-hand side of the airport, and so that it wouldn't cross Bendix at all. But that may mean that it needs to cross Lincoln Lane. So what that looks like is still up into design. So right now it's still too early to tell is what I would say. But I'm sure we could, as that moves along, ask NICTD and their planning firm if they're able to present at this board in the future as it moves forward.
So James, I know it feels as though this move is obviously to get the station on the west side of the airport, but it will deadhead there, right? And,
Yeah.
And I know there has been some additional thought of whether or not in my grandchildren's lifetime, could we get it to extend further east? And will there be some way to kind of foresee a connection there? And I know that South Bend was looking for a downtown kind of piece, and obviously I'm not quite sure how Dave feels, but Elkhart would love to be along that route if we could get there.
Yeah, I can't answer what South Shore wants to do long term, right? But they don't own rail east of where they currently make that C. So that rail line that goes east is predominantly Norfolk Southern and Canadian National. And so the challenge there then is working with those operators of those rail lines to either build a second set of or another set of rails for South Shore, or to have an operating agreement with those freight rails. And outside of Amtrak, that's very difficult. Later, though, in the agenda, we will talk about some potential options to enhance Amtrak service, which does currently operate through Elkhart, goes through South Bend as well. So commuter rail and rail traffic in general is something that we are generally interested in trying to fix and improve. So I don't want to say no, but I don't know. Right now, I would say South Shore's focus is on completing their existing major capital projects with the double tracking and the West Lakes, and then potentially this relocation. That is their current kind of capital list.
Might be your great-grandkids, Mayor.
Yeah, or great grands. I didn't want to go beyond the grands, but I get it. I get it.
So is the idea of moving it to the downtown would bypass the airport?
So this study, I don't believe, looks at that. I believe this study just looks at the airport location. It has been studied by ACOM and many other partners of what it might look like to get it downtown. And I think South Shore's stance at this point is they're always open to further discussions. But right now we need to fix the existing station, and we'll keep the possibility open in the future to ever have a downtown location. I don't think they're opposed to it. It's just right now we need to take care of the existing location. So.
I'll entertain a motion for Transit Resolution 723.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Just one question.
Sir, go ahead.
On the west side, will it be integrated? If will it be integrated into the building facility of the airport, much like it is now, for accessibility and convenience?
Yeah. I believe that would be its intent.
We don't have any drawings.
We don't have
or
any
anything.
drawings at this point.
Yeah.
But the discussions have always been that it would be an integrated facility. The biggest challenge right now, there are a number of challenges outside of all of the ones that Allison mentioned. One of the other challenges operationally is that there's not any extra siding or anywhere to store train cars in a secured location. Many challenges that prevent then South Shore feeling like it can leave a car at the airport overnight. And so what ends up happening operationally is cars are stored in Michigan City. And for end of line, that means that an operator wakes up at 4 a.m. Central Time to commute the train here to then start service. It's just operationally very inefficient. And so not only are there the additional benefits that Allison mentioned, but there are definitely operational benefits as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. James?
All right. So, as you all are familiar, we have been working on our Connect Transit Plan. This has been ongoing for the last few months. And I say that somewhat jokingly because it has been going on for the past, 12 to 16 months. This has been a multi-phased approach to talking through what public transit could look like over the next 10 years throughout our region. It's been a great joint partnership between us and Transpo, and Scudder WAG with Jarrett Walker and Associates will be doing a brief highlight reel for you of kind of this last phase of engagement and what we've heard and what the draft recommendations look like. I believe Scudder's primarily going to focus on Elkhart and Goshen today, because that's what, while we have been leading the plan and it will be fully inclusive of South Bend, Mishawaka, Elkhart, and Goshen, as the policy board, we have most direct control over what will happen in Elkhart and Goshen, whereas Transpo has their own separate board. But if you do have any questions related to South Bend or Mishawaka, I'm positive Scudder can help answer those. But I will turn it over to Scudder to kind of walk us through where we're at with a summary of the draft recommendations.
Thank you, James. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep. Can hear you great.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your time today. Just wanted to give everyone a briefing of where we are, what we've heard, and how we plan to finish out this final plan for the Connect process. We have been wrapping up the third and final phase of our public engagement process here in February. It started in December with the release of the draft plan, and we have had a series of public engagement events, starting with our stakeholder workshop in December, as well as 4 open houses in person in Elkhart, Goshen, South Bend, and Mishawaka, a virtual open house, as well as a series of smaller events with various community organizations and showing up at community fairs and events to engage people and have them respond to our survey about the network recommendations we presented. So just a quick reminder on those. I'll focus again on Elkhart and Goshen. Today's existing network, the existing frequency of service, dark blue meaning every 30 minutes, light green meaning every 60 minutes, and emphasizing the loops as you see them, one-way loops with the arrows, as many routes in the current network have one-way loops in Elkhart in particular. With the work we did in the second phase, looking at concepts for the short-term and additional funding networks, we came to a recommendation in the short term of with the additional funding that Goshen would bring to the table, we would have new hourly services, the 53 and 52 you see on these maps, serving west, north, Goshen, as well as Greencroft and some other portions of South Goshen with those services, and just a few tweaks to routes and services in Elkhart. In particular, on here, Route 35, the orange line, some adjustments there. When we asked people, we went out and surveyed both in person and online to get people's responses. As of last week, as I put these survey responses together, we had about 148 responses about these services in Elkhart and Goshen. We had a similar number roughly about South Bend and Mishawaka. We asked about the two networks separately. And some people answered both. Some people just answered about one set of recommendations. 81% of respondents said they agreed that the network recommendations in the short term would be better for them. And 79% agreed that those short-term recommendations would help them use transit more. So overall, a very positive response to these short-term recommendations. I should add, we've continued to do outreach since I produced these results. We've actually got about 60 or 70 additional responses in the survey just in the last few days. In terms of whether these network recommendations would be better for Elkhart and Goshen and the region overall, 86% of respondents agreed that these short-term recommendations would be better. Some notable comments we received in terms of things people would like to see, but are obviously hard to do within the short term where we don't have substantially more funding, just a little bit more funding from the addition of service in Goshen. Many people noted a desire for more frequent service on most routes, regular comments about having 30-minute or better service, a desire for 7-day-a-week service, adding Sundays, and a desire for early mornings and later evenings. Those are things that we have included in the additional funding network. As you recall, this network includes 80% more service, an aspirational goal for the next 10 years to both increase the frequency of service in a number of places in that 52 route, the 53 route, and service in South Elkhart and North Elkhart along Cassopolis, and adding more weekend and evening service in this additional funding network. So again, this is predicated on additional funding from local providers, local governments in order to make this happen. So this is a recommendation of what you could do. The full plan has a menu of options that you can achieve over time, and you would obviously not immediately make the investment level to get to this within the next year or two, but you could build up to this. The public response to this was generally very positive. 85% of people agreed it would be better for them in terms of their ability to use transit, and 83% said it would help them, it would encourage them to use transit more. And 86% agreed that it would be better for Elkhart and Goshen overall to have that additional funding network. This survey remains open until February 10th. So just a few more days. So if you or anyone you know hasn't had a chance yet, we encourage you to pass along the survey at our website, connecttransitplan.com. And based on the survey responses we've received so far, we do not expect to have substantial changes to the network recommendations within Elkhart and Goshen. We've had some conversations with Greencroft about the precise path of the recommended routes through that community. And so we will have a few tweaks to that route and also to the route in Western Goshen, just a minor tweak we expect to that. Within South Bend and Mishawaka, we expect some slightly more significant changes to the network recommendations. We expect to make some adjustments to routes 1, 12, 7, and 15A in the short-term network recommendations. In particular, we expect to be able to provide 30-minute service on Main Street in Mishawaka in the short-term network recommendations, as well as revise Route 12, the Rum Village route. In the short-term recommendations, we had shortened the loop significantly, and we expect to be able to make the loop recommendations cover more of the existing service area. We also expect to, in the additional funding network recommendations, provide service to the Pokagon community and Four Winds Hotel and Casino, as well as have some menu options related to those added services and more detailed menu of individual service improvements over time in the final plan. For example, more detail about individual improvements in frequency in some of the recommendations. So those are the expected changes, not dramatic or substantial changes in South and Elkhart and Goshen as part of the revisions. So the final plan report will be coming forward to you at your next meeting in March. It will look very much like the draft plan report with a few of these tweaks and the updated information about the final survey results for this draft plan survey, which will close at the end of the week. And we'll be requesting your approval of the final plan at that March meeting. So that's our update. Happy to take questions.
Any questions for Scudder?
Yeah, I got a question. I know there's a really small percentage that were very dissatisfied or thought the service would be worse.
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting that the tail should wag the dog by, looking at those, but what were their complaints on the ones that were strongly disagreed that this plan was good? I mean, were they totally losing service, or what was their complaint?
For folks in Elkhart and Goshen, I might have to dig a little deeper to say, in particular, all of the relevant potential comments about people who were dissatisfied. I do know there was some dissatisfaction with how we recommended to revise the red line in the area of South Goshen, where we take service off of College Avenue with the red line to take it by the hospital more directly. And so some folks who live along this section of College Avenue who have more direct service with the more frequent red line were a little bit dissatisfied with that change. And I believe some of them indicated that they were dissatisfied in that answer. This is a challenging trade-off here. If we want to serve the hospital more directly, we don't really have a choice in that change. I believe there was also some concern and dissatisfaction with the changes to the Orange Line 35 no longer going to Concord Mall, even though the mall is obviously not significantly active anymore. There are other destinations that a few people who have one-seat rides kind of like today. But the trade-off, if we don't make this change, we cannot provide the additional service up into the industrial areas off Middlebury that we have made in this recommendation. So there's always, some level of dissatisfaction with any change. And those are certainly the more significant ones. And Jeremiah may have some other thoughts about others that he may have seen. If you recall, Jeremiah, I don't know if you have specific thoughts of others that you may have seen in the recommendation or in the survey results.
Scudder, you pretty much summarized.
Okay, thanks.
So Stuart, as well, did you break out Goshen and Elkhart, or did you do all the respondents in an aggregate?
So the results you see here about would the short-term network recommendations be better for me is a specific question just about changes in Elkhart and Goshen. There's a separate set of questions about changes in South Bend and Mishawaka. So we do not have a breakout of Elkhart changes or Goshen changes separately.
Yeah, the way that it was looked at was for the transpo system, for the trolley system. So there's not necessarily a individual Elkhart response versus an individual Goshen response, but there is an individual Elkhart Goshen response compared to South Bend Mishawaka because it's a connected system.
Is there any filters you can use to dig into that? I mean, because obviously the respondents in Elkhart wouldn't necessarily have a concern about going to Goshen Hospital, and the respondents in Goshen wouldn't necessarily be concerned about making it to the industrial areas of Elkhart. So
yeah, I mean, there's probably ways based on comments that are provided by route, because if we make improvements to the blue line that runs up north in northern parts of Elkhart. And so folks who are commenting on that are probably more of an Elkhart writer than say folks who are, working on or who are interested in some of the new routes in Goshen. So I think there is a way to look at it. There is definitely a flow of people back and forth, whether or not it's people living in Elkhart and commuting to a job in Goshen or vice versa. So, I mean, we've always viewed it as kind of a connected system where it gets you, if you live on the south side of Elkhart, to get to the Meyer in Dunlap might be more important than getting to the new Meyer up on, the County Road 6 area, right? Like, so it's kind of a a connected system. So, but we could probably look at it on a by route if that was of interest.
It is. And obviously some of the assets that we have in Elkhart are different than those that are in Goshen, and obviously the ridership would reflect that. So just to get an idea of where those respondents are coming from would be great. So if you can filter that, that would be wonderful.
We will see what we can do.
I have a question for Scudder. What are your thoughts towards the amount of responses? Were you happy with the amount of people that responded, or?
And Scudder, could you also kind of walk through, if you have the numbers, because we've done a lot of surveying across the entire study. So 150 might seem low initially, but if you walk through maybe what our results were in each.
I just want to get a sense for how well we did it.
Yeah. So like I said, we've added quite a few just in the last couple of days. So the final numbers, I expect to be close to 500 total responses. And again, not everyone answered every question. So, some people only answered the question about Elkhart Goshen. Some people only answered the questions about South Bend and Mishawaka, and some answered both. So I would expect this total number to be easily over 200, probably 250 for the Elkhart Goshen questions. In phase 1 and phase 2, or rounds 1 and rounds 2 of engagement that we did, at each of those rounds, we received over 500 responses through the process, which have been helpful and guiding. And relative to the size of your community and the other communities we worked in, it's fairly reasonable numbers, I'd say. It is hard to get a lot of people to pay attention to a transit survey in, mid-sized American cities. It really is. And unless you pay an extraordinary amount of money to have people go and ride buses all the time and go to hundreds of events and do phone surveys, it's really hard to get really big numbers.
Well, I understand that. I'm curious from your perspective how responsive people are to the survey.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of transit riders. Almost half of our responses are from existing transit riders.
Because one of our most successful techniques, even though we had an engagement team and we tried to do lots of public events and, we've done lots of community meetings, but one of the ways that we got the most responses is by whether it was Jeremiah or Tierra or our staff, interns, Bjorn over at Transpo, going out, being on the buses, being out at the transfer centers. The hard thing about this final recommendation phase, and why I don't want to say we struggled with results, but why our results were perhaps a little bit lower, is standing out at the transfer center in the middle of February isn't exactly the most conducive environment to asking someone to fill out a 5-minute survey. So, from a timing perspective, ideally, we might have been able to get more in-person responses in a March or April setting. I don't know necessarily that those results would be infinitely different than what we're seeing.
When did the window open?
For this phase, or
For the survey phase?
For this survey phase, that started
started the first week of December.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, for the other phases, because informing the decisions leading up to this, there was phases throughout the summer and spring of last year. So, part of it is a timing issue. Part of it is a capacity, because the way that we got the majority of our responses was through in person at the center, or on the buses. While ideally, sure, we got some that were filled out electronically by just interested individuals. The majority of it really came down to staff that were out there physically trying to get.
Yeah, I was just curious, Scudder's viewpoint of the response relative to the size of the enterprise, and because he does it more often than we do.
Yep.
So James, Transpo's a taxing unit. They have a mechanism for raising their own funds, but I heard in this presentation that there would be an ask of other local governments. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so I think that language is perhaps tailored most to the trolley, because the trolley is not a taxing unit. And so the trolley is, I always joke that it's more of the PBS model, where local governments and viewers like you can donate, because that is not a direct taxing entity. And so we do rely on revenue generation from, our fairs and from advertising and all of those things, but as well as local government contributions. And so, additional investment, new service, additional service would require additional levels of contribution. When it comes to Transpo, I think there is a question of what that would look like. We're exploring that with them to see if there are local governments that may want to enhance service. And, if there are options to ask local governments. But yes, they are ultimately a taxing entity that could generate that tax and or seek referendum. They have a few more options on revenue generation than, say, the trolley. So it'll be a little different in each area. But if Mishawaka or South Bend, say, wanted to provide them additional funds, I think they want to make sure that they have a listing of, things that you could invest in if that was your prerogative. Not saying that it is, just saying that those options would be available. Without additional funds, there are still some recommendations to how service can be improved in the existing network with existing funding. So there could be changes regardless of additional funds. It's just if we want to see, more 30-minute service, more frequent service, less basic lifeline service, then additional funding does have to come from somewhere.
James?
Sorry to give you the non-answer there. I don't know if that helps. Yeah.
I don't know if this is a Scudder or question for you, but what is the mechanism that brings us back to the table to look at the possibility of expansion?
Yeah, so the overall plan will finish up its public engagement and public comment period in February / beginning of March. And then the board of MACOG will be presented the full study at the March meeting for adoption. And then Transpo's board will do this similar adoption. I think it's like 2 weeks later in March. Then from there, it's, I don't want to say it's up to each service to try and work through those implementation strategies, because we have a really good working relationship with Transpo. And so we do help them out a lot with planning and those kind of things. But I think there is, what we've tried to design is a short-term network that we could change to hypothetically today with existing funds. And then in order to do anything moving forward beyond that in the future network, it's prioritizing and seeking those additional funds, right? And so, what will that be? I think a lot of that is us working with Transpo or us looking at the trolley, and then working with local governments, if there's an interest in that, to continue to move that forward.
Is there additional surveying that'll take place to see if, because this is kind of hypothetical.
Yeah.
So once it's in place, are we going to look at that through additional surveying to see if it's working?
Yeah, I know there are a number of metrics that we would look at. Chief amongst them would be ridership, to understand how that's impacting. If you did a major change, what is it doing to ridership? We do look at that monthly and a lot of other kind of key data. Whether or not we would do surveying, I think ultimately would depend on how big the change was. If we're shifting a block or two, I don't know that we're necessarily going to do a lot of surveying there, but if we're reversing the flow of an entire route, something like that would probably, it could be something that we would look at. Yep.
Anything else for Scudder or anybody or James?
We need a motion, we all move, we're still already voted, right?
No, this is just informational purposes only.
Next month.
Next month is the adoption of that plan. And we'll have a little bit longer presentation just in case, just to remind you of where we've been over the last few months, because we do have new members. And so we'll walk you through that next month. So today is just giving you the heads up that'll be coming and letting you know what we've initially heard.
James, just to bring you aware that several of us will be absent next month. We do have a named board meeting.
Is that right?
Yes.
All right. We'll look at that.
Legislative dinner.
Oh.
Could we push it back a month if we had to?
Yeah, we could. I mean, it's not overly time dependent in the sense that we don't have to have it turned in by a certain day or anything like that. This is a study that we've essentially commissioned, and so it's a little bit on our timeline.
Yeah.
So if we feel like there won't be good attendance, we'll look at pushing that.
Well, hold it back on our account either. I mean,
Sure.
Well,
We'll just want to make sure.
comes up, are we even going to have a quorum because of that?
So this is what we were talking about before. At the beginning of the meeting is, today was the AIC legislative conference, and luckily, we called ahead of time and made sure that we were going to have a quorum. But I was commenting to Mayor Jenkins that sometimes when AIM has events, we lose too many members where we can't make quorum. So we'll do a double check on it.
You're not going to that?
Because AIM has the potential to draw away 10 members of the board. So that makes it a little more challenging. So we'll do a double check on that. Thanks for the heads up.
Okay. Safe streets and roads?
Yeah, we do have a few staff updates. Before we get to Safe Streets for All, I did want to introduce you to a new staff member who just started this week. So he is, let me see what I'm doing here. I'm trying to do too many things. So Raj is here with us. So Raj, if you want to introduce yourself, Raj is our new transportation analyst.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Raj Parikh. I'm new transportation analyst at MACOG. It's my third day at the office, and it's a pleasure to meet you all. So I'm thrilled to be part of such a successful and strategic team at MACOG in the transportation team. And previously coming to here, I did my master's in public informatics at Rutgers University in New Jersey. So the course offers a mixture of transportation planning and data analytics courses. Prior to coming here in the States, I did my undergrad in urban planning at Nirma University in Gujarat. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and I am happy to serve the region.
Thanks, Raj.
Welcome, Raj. Appreciate it.
So Raj is going to be our transportation analyst, and in that role, you'll see him work with a lot of data interpolation, trying to do data visualization, as well as working on our travel demand model and forecasting. So that's kind of Raj's role. So we're glad to have him on board, especially as we work through our long-range plan. So welcome. Next, we had an update. You should have gotten an email. At this point, it's been a week now. So last week, our MACOG applied for a competitive grant called Safe Streets and Roads for All, which is known as SS4A. That is a new grant program. So this was the first year that was underway. We applied on behalf of the region, and that was Elkhart, St. Joe, Marshall, and Kosciuszko. USDOT got their map a little wrong, and we had to ask them to correct it because they only showed our urban counties for some reason. But anyone from Marshall or Kosciuszko, I can guarantee you that it will cover those counties as well. And we applied for what is called a Regional Safety Action Plan. This is required by USDOT if you want to access their capital funds in this program. So if you're looking to make capital improvements that would increase safety on our roadways, that is a potential pot of funds. But first you have to have a plan that they have approved. And so instead of each of you applying individually to create your own plan, we said at the beginning of this process that we would apply on behalf of the entire region. So when our plan is done, our entire region is eligible for those funds. So we were awarded $500,000. That is the largest award in all of Indiana and represents 27% of the funding given to Indiana. So this was a pretty large award for us. And we were all very excited about that. And I want to personally thank Caitlin Stevens, Allison Reagan, and Dustin New, who worked tirelessly to make that a reality. And we'll work tirelessly as we work through the harder part of this, which is doing the plan. When it comes to the timeline of that, it's still a little unclear. As USDOT has made the announcement, they are then going to work through a grant agreement, which they don't have yet. And so it will still be a little bit of time before we're really able to take action on moving this plan forward. So bear with us. We'll continue to give you timelines on all of that, but this will be a fairly large planning process and undertaking to try and improve safety throughout the region on our roadways for all users. So just an FYI, wanted to make you aware of that announcement in case you didn't see it.
James, do you know in particular, I should say particular, in general, what types of items that may be funded out of that fund?
Yes. And perhaps what would be easiest for me to do is we might be able to send. So USDOT was pretty clear that for the most part, they were only planning to fund plans in this first round. Out of 500 investments that they made, only 37 of them were for capital. So I think what might be easiest is if we send the board some highlights, because they have like a dossier packet of what those 37 capital investments look like. Now, some of them are large in, LA or those kind of areas, but I think there's a good sampling in there that you can kind of see what they at least funded in that initial round. That will, I don't want to say it'll change over time, but because you have to have the plan, there were less capital projects that they chose. I know like Indianapolis and Fort Wayne both applied for capital projects, and there were no capital projects awarded in all of Indiana. They only awarded planning projects this first round in Indiana. So more and more folks will be eligible. That means there might be a diversity of projects moving forward, but at least those 37 kind of give you an initial glimpse of what their preferences were for funding. It was a mixture though of bike trails and all sorts of different things. So
we rate our intersections in regards to safety, and I know that DOT does it as well.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether or not they were going to use that same type of scale to look at some of the projects that we're thinking about embarking upon.
Yeah, that is plausible. I don't have an initial good feel for that, but we can get you more information.
Then James, will this be a subcontractor or consultants doing this? Will this be in-house?
Yeah, so there will be some, the predominant portion of in-house time will be spent on engagement. As much as we love our consulting partners, they do really, really, really good work, but we feel like we do better on the engagement front. So we would probably prefer to handle engagement more in-house, but that the actual technical plan and those items will be contracted out.
And is that something you'll need additional staff for? Or?
I don't anticipate that we'll be needing additional staff at this time. We are evaluating how exactly that budget will fully break down because we gave them a general budget. So we'll look at that. But this is also kind of a short window because the thing that is hard for me to understand is that they just announced the awards, and at the same time of announcing the awards, they've opened a new call. Yeah. But in order to be eligible for capital projects, they want you to have a plan, and they just awarded 400 awards for plans, which are the first award. it feels a little silly in its timing, but this will be an annual program for the next 4 years. So we really would like to get a plan completed within the next year so that we could start to hit year 3 for applications. So.
Caitlin? Morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I just wanted to iterate that myself and the rest of the transportation team is really looking forward to kind of getting that plan started and working with you all on it. Moving into some other kind of USDOT discretionary grant items. They recently put out a grant preparation checklist. So if any of your municipalities are interested in kind of pursuing the numerous grants that are available the coming year, I would highly recommend going through that kind of grant checklist to see kind of where your strong and weak points might be. Also, they're hosting a webinar related to this and how you can better prepare yourself for applying for funds. That webinar takes place, I think, this afternoon. If you're interested, this gives you a little bit of a snapshot on some of the upcoming grant programs that will be announced through the summer. If you want to, the one that's coming up probably quickest is the USDOT RAISE grant. It's a multimodal merit-based discretionary grant program. Applications are due at the end of this month. Some of the core merit criteria that it's based off of include safety, sustainability, quality of life, and mobility and connectivity. And so really intended for surface transportation investments that will make a significant local or regional impact. I know we're working with a couple communities in our region to put in a claiming grant application for this, but if your community has been talking about pursuing, feel free to reach out to myself and see how we might be able to assist through that process. And then another way that would be is great for you to engage with this in preparation for these type of grants is through our Michiana on the Move 2050 transportation plan. So this is our blueprint. I know we've talked about it at many boards, but this is our blueprint for transportation investments in our region over 20 plus years. We just included kind of our first round of public engagement. So we closed our public engagement survey out last week, and we're kind of reviewing and summarizing some of those results that we will hopefully be able to share with you in upcoming policy board meetings. As we kind of conclude that, we're moving into kind of the next phase of that process, and that is really narrowing down on some of our transportation deficiencies and items like that that might engage what types of strategies and projects we'd like to be including in our plan. And so when we're thinking about kind of discretionary grant programs, this is a great opportunity to identify what your specific priorities are for those type of projects so that we can have a clear or better understanding a region as a whole, what we might like to pursue in the next 4 years of large discretionary grants that are available to our region. So the intent of this plan is that we'll go through kind of the deficiencies and then move into identifying our projects and recommendations with a plan to be adopted in the fall. And this is just a snapshot. As part of our public survey, we also had a public comment map where people were able to identify various issues, including safety, congestion, maintenance, those type of things. And as you can see, safety was by far the highest, I guess, marked concern on the map. But as I mentioned before, we'll be able to provide kind of a further summary of some of those results in the next few months.
And then just real quick, we wanted to make everyone aware. So every month we update our fiscal year 22 to 26 tip. We are currently in the process of creating a new tip. So If the current tip wasn't confusing enough, will be equally confusing with the new tip. So just right now, we're developing a draft project listing, a draft narrative. Send that through NDOT, Federal Highway, Federal Transit. The idea is to have something out for public comment end of March, 30-day comment period. We'll put it at the end of April. And then hopefully the May policy board, we can have something to you guys to present and adopt. So just wanted to make you aware that that's going on in the background.
Ms. Allison, Leah?
Hi, my name's Leah. I'm the environmental planner here. And want to let you all know that we have picked a date for Partners for Clean Air. That'll be April 19th over at Elkhart at the Matterhorn, where we typically hold that event. It's an educational program, but it's also an opportunity to recognize a few award winners in business, nonprofit, government, and education sectors that have made exemplary strides in efficiency or sustainability projects over the last year. So we are asking for your ideas, your nominations, particularly in the business sector, where we may be more some great examples that we can highlight throughout the region. So check your inbox in the e-Gazette or an e-blast that came out this week. There'll be a link to submit your nominations for those.
What is that again?
April 19th is Wednesday. Yeah, it's generally around Earth Day.
Thanks, Leah. James?
All right. As promised earlier when we were talking about South Shoreline, I just wanted to give you a brief update of another program that is out there that we are looking to be involved in. Amtrak and FRA released a program that's essentially called the Corridor Identification Program. There are applications that are due March 20th, and what they are looking at is for the identification of Amtrak corridors that are less than 750 miles, because that's essentially under 750 are usually considered local routes for Amtrak, and that then they require more state participation or local participation. And so they are trying to figure out where they might be able to enhance service or provide new services. So there are two conversations that are happening in our region, and that we are talking with coalitions kind of across mainly Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois about, that we are looking to potentially be a part of. First would be a service that would be a new service, which would originate either out of Columbus, has always been the potential, but also Pittsburgh is a potential, but it'll go Columbus, Lima, go through Fort Wayne, and then go through our rural area. So to go to Warsaw and Plymouth as it made its way to Chicago. Fort Wayne is trying to figure out how they can get back to having Amtrak service. They lost Amtrak service many years ago, as well as Columbus does not have good service to Chicago. So this naturally kind of flows through our area. This is not looking for MACOG to provide funding for, or really to do anything else other than to be a good planning partner as they try, if they're successful and are identified in this application program, then they would work through, I think it's a $500,000 award or something like that, to do some planning services to try and figure out what it would take to make that service actually happen. The other corridor that we've been having conversations with over the last year is on our existing Amtrak service. So if you're not familiar, Amtrak through a few different lines heads out of Chicago. That might not be the origination of the actual line, but for us, comes out of Chicago and heads towards Cleveland or vice versa, going through South Bend, Elkhart, as well as then Toledo. That corridor is our primary Amtrak service in our region right now. And it experiences a lot of different challenges as it does have to operate predominantly on Norfolk Southern lines. And so it gets put behind, even though it's not supposed to, but it ultimately does get put behind freight traffic, and it experiences delays and reliability issues and those kind of things. Additionally, within our area, we have those two stations in downtown Elkhart, and then adjacent to downtown South Bend, and in particular, the downtown South Bend adjacent station off of the Orange area is not exactly the most beloved Amtrak station. It is an awful station as a gateway for our community, for our region. It's at best the pole barn. And so Cleveland has also talked about that their station facility is lackluster. And so we are talking to our friends, Cleveland, Toledo, our area, as well as Chicago, about being a part of an application there, so that we can talk. In particular, one of our things that we would be talking about is station enhancements, especially the South Bend station. Now, whether or not we're selected, whether or not those things move forward, we would let you know, but we are looking to be a part of those two kind of major corridors. We are having conversations with our partners in Cleveland, which is MACOG, the Northeast Ohio agency coordinating, and it's NOACA. And then they'll probably be the lead applicant. So this isn't going to be a large staff undertaking time preparing, because it's due March 20th. But we'll provide them with letters of support, and we've been in communication with Indiana DOT to see if we'll get letters of support from them. And then in the southern corridor, the new service, we had a good coordinating call the other day with the city of Fort Wayne, our partners over in Columbus, which is MORPC, our partners over in Fort Wayne, which is NERC, and our partners over in Northwest Indiana, which is NERC. But a lot of regional and bi-state coordination with other friends. And most likely, at least as of now, it sounds like Fort Wayne is going to be the lead applicant. But that may change as we get closer to March 20th. So we'll also look to provide letters of support for that corridor as well. So we wanted to make you aware of it. As you know, the region continues to focus on all things transportation. Rail and passenger rail is one of those items of importance. And so we are at least lucky in some of our areas to have Amtrak service. That's not always the case, but there's a lot to be desired there of enhancing that service. And we view that as complementary to South Shore, and it would be a great complement to also see service in Plymouth and Warsaw. So that's kind of what we're looking to support and provide really staffing assistance to. We're not doing any sort of financial contributions or any of those kind of things. That isn't the ask, but we wanted to make sure that you were fully read in and aware of that, as that grant application will be coming due March 20th.
Can we have some additional discussion about
100%.
Some of the planning processes that are taking place around our depot and our station? And I'm not quite sure if it could be a part of the application process, but I think you need to know some of the changes that
would be happy to have that conversation.
That's good.
Yep.
Are you aware of the conversation to want the transpo station to stop downtown?
Yeah, we have plans actually from back in the 90s when Transpo talked about when they built South Street Station of what Amtrak service platform would have looked like in downtown. For those not familiar, Canadian National actually runs on the top two lines there. So a lot of people always thought that the upstairs was always meant to be an Amtrak platform, and it never was, because Amtrak doesn't run and operate on that side of the rail. It operates on the south side. So there's actually a really weird triangular piece of parcel that's down there on the south side, kind of catty-corner to Rose Lily. That was always designed to be where the Amtrak station would have been. And they would have directional board through, so you would have walked into South Street Station, walked under the rail, and then gone up. So we do still have those designs from the 90s, whether or not it's that or something else. I think in general, I don't think Amtrak wants to invest in the South Bend location because they know it's a bad location. And I think they would be very excited to invest in a new location somewhere else in South Bend. And the thing that we need to be cognizant of, not to talk about this too long, But Michigan has spent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to have their Amtrak service be able to do 125 miles an hour, up to 125 miles an hour. So coming out of Chicago, it's then on its own dedicated line as it goes through Michigan and heads to Detroit. Now, currently that service ends in Detroit, but there is conversations about building from Detroit down to Toledo. And operationally, long term, if enhancements aren't necessarily made along our corridor, there could be a case made for, well, maybe you should just go up to Niles, and Amtrak maybe should just kind of deviate around this northern portion of Indiana, because then they wouldn't have to contend with Norfolk Southern. And I think that's a problem for our region. I'm not saying that Amtrak has ever said that. This is their plan, and it shows our service on there. But as Michigan continues to make enhancements to their Amtrak service, and Norfolk Southern traffic continues to grow, there is going to be an inherent challenge here over time if enhancements aren't made to the existing Amtrak service. So that's our long-term kind of challenge.
Mark?
Yeah, last thing, Commissioner Wyrick and Commissioner Gerninger joined me as we went to Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago for the National Association of Regional Councils. It was a good conference. We had some good meetings with Congressman Yakum, so it was great to see him in his new role. Had a great conversation with him around transportation priorities. And in that conversation, we talked about Safe Streets for All, and if they found out first, to let us know. And they did find out first, so I actually had about a week's heads up before the DOT announcement came out. So lots of great conversations there, and I think we'll have a great advocate for Indiana 2 there with Congressman Yakum. Did have meetings with Senator Braun and Senator Young. Those meetings are always a little bit harder because they cover a much larger area, and the meeting is not a one-on-one. It is a work the room kind of meeting, and so you have less time. Still had some good conversations there, but also got a lot of good perspectives of what's going on in DC, what the 118th Congress may do or not do over the next few years. But then also it was great to hear from federal agencies as we start to think through what they're working on over the next few years. So it was a great trip, and I appreciated that the commissioners could join me this year.
I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity, allowing me to go and represent us. It was good to just be able to talk to our senators and congressmen, as well as just people from around the nation that do what we do, and hear what their problems are and how they're handling it, as well as the federal agencies there that we don't normally get a chance to get to hear from directly. Usually it's their representatives. So it was a good trip. I was able to attend, and if you ever have the chance to, would encourage you to do so.
It's also a great opportunity for our elected officials to see organizations like us, but from other areas, and to hear what they're working on. Because your only experience with the Council of Governments or Regional Council is us. So sometimes you don't know necessarily that you should be asking us to do something further, or that we could do something. So while we're always open to things, I do think it's always a great learning opportunity for our elected officials to hear and see what other regional councils are working on. I tend to think that we do a pretty good offering of services, but it does kind of broaden that horizon of your understanding. So always appreciate folks being able to join. With that would conclude all of our staff updates.
Open to the floor, public comment. Anyone? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
A motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Yo, thank you.
James, quick question.
Sir.